Hello everyone, let's take a few minutes to look at our readings for Chapter 7. Look at some of the, Module 7, and let's look at some of the highlights of Chapter 8 and 9 that are addressed in Module 7. In Module 7, we're discussing program and project management, which are essential means for implementing ERP in an organization. And we step back and look at change management and the change process because ERP implementations involve major changes to the organization. And project management is the key means for making this happen. So let's take a look at both and see how they apply. So you need a project team to have a strong foundation, a dedicated team to implement the ERP. And you may well have something known as a PMO, or some companies call it a PO, a project office, to ensure that you're following good practice, you understand budgets, schedules, resource allocations between all the different sub-projects involved in the ERP implementation. So the project office is where all the practices, best practices, methodologies, techniques for managing projects are housed in an organization. And a project manager has to know something about how the system works. You need negotiation skills because you're going to have to negotiate with the vendor to make modifications to the end users on what they can and can't accept or will and won't accept. And you also need to negotiate for resources and funding. It requires a certain amount of political savvy. So there's a lot of moving parts in an ERP implementation. Project manager leads that, so you need a lot of skill. The essence of project management is managing according to what's known as the project management triangle, the triple constraint, the iron triangle. And it works like this. How much are you going to do, which is the scope, or to what degree of performance is your system going to implement? What schedule are you going to follow that's associated with time? And what resources are you going to apply? Now, if you want more of one thing, you're going to have to accept less of another. For example, the more scope you try to implement, the longer it's going to take, and perhaps the more funding or resources it's going to take. The fewer resources that you have available, the less scope you can implement, and maybe the longer it's going to take to do it. So you could see these three elements trade off against one another. How you trade them off really depends on the strategy of the company, and the project manager is keenly aware of these constraints and the priority in which they're managed, and that's really what a project manager focuses on. So program management is a coordinated management of interdependent projects. So it does beg the question, what's the difference between a project and a program? Some define a program as a very large project. Or maybe a very large project that has a number of sub-projects. For example, we think in terms of the space shuttle program versus the space shuttle project because there's so many different complex subsystems that need to be done. So a program could be either one large project with a lot of sub-projects associated with it, or it could be a bundle of related projects that are achieving similar goals. So a program manager has to look at all of the sub-projects or all of the projects that are kicked off in order to implement ERP. So you might manage the entire program where you have multiple projects underneath the program management level. And you may have several different project teams to do several different components. Here's a sample organization of a project executive. The project executive has the project management office underneath it. There's functional teams that implement certain components of ERP, but then there's also some technology, some underlying technological support that crosses across all the different functional implementations. You have module experts, usually from the supplier, and also you may have some module experts internal to your company. You have subject matter experts that may not know as much about the module, but know how certain business processes ought to be done, to comply with best practices in that discipline. Here's an example of an organization team. I think we just took a look at that, so we'll go ahead and move on. Project leadership. What does the project office need to do? You have to make sure you start up cleanly by hiring the right staff and do the initial setup. You interact between technical and functional staff. You get senior management commitment. You have to monitor closely staff and professional consultant turnover, because sometimes you have consultants that can't stay during the entire implementation. You also have resistance from end users that the PMO has to deal with. Okay, here's another view. There's multiple views of this in your text, and you can read this in your readings this week. What are some critical success factors? Make clear the decision-making process. Who makes technology decisions? Who makes business decisions? Who makes the final call on how certain processes are going to be implemented? Exactly what does the project include and what does it not include? Understanding what it does not include is just as important as what it does include. Good teamwork is essential. You also have to communicate the importance of change. You are doing something different, and you're doing it different for a reason. You're trying to adopt best practices. Okay, so ERP is a big change in the organization, and that leads to a discussion of change management in general. You could be implementing ERP due to restructuring operations, or you want to implement new technology, but often it's due to a change in mission. It may be related to mergers. For example, I've been in companies that merged. They all had different systems, and they wanted to pull them together under a common system umbrella, and that led to an ERP implementation. So there's lots of reasons for change, but ERP systems, since they touch every aspect of the company, is highly associated with change, and it is a change management activity. So you need organizational commitment. You need to communicate that commitment. There's also something that you should consider when you assess the capability of the organization to implement something like an ERP system, to implement project management, and to manage change, and that's something known as a maturity model. A company is said to be mature in that to the degree that it follows processes and it manages its process infrastructure and updates them and continuously improves them over the time. The OPM3 is a project management maturity model that spells out how you ought to manage projects in your organization and provides a pathway for best practices. I should emphasize at this point that OPM3 is just one of many maturity models. Another common one for software is known as the CMM, the Capability Maturity Model, by the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. And there's also the CMMI, Capability Maturity Model Integrated for project teams. Okay, so change management, the idea is that you should plan how you're going to change so you can maximize the benefits, and it's an integral part of ERP implementation. What does the OPM3 do? You have knowledge, you have assessment, and you have improvement. So you not only, it's not enough for a company to know what ought to be done, you need to measure the degree to which you're doing it, and then you continuously improve your processes. I'll say this much though, the OPM3 is a very complex model, and the CMM is also complex, so you have to be really sharp in order to implement something like this in the organization, but it is a means by which you can assess your capability. It helps organizations identify and deliver the right projects. It's said to produce better performance. It helps align strategy with projects that sustain business success, mitigates operating cost. So it really focuses your attention on process management and making sure you're doing the right thing and you're doing things right. Figure 9.1 shows you how the OPM model works, from knowledge, assessment, and then improvement. This is a very high-level overview, but there are thousands of processes underneath this high-level overview, so it's not for the timid by any means. Business process re-engineering is usually a major part of ERP, because an ERP system is usually going to contain different operating processes compared to what the legacy systems that were in place. You are re-engineering how you're doing things, and you'll encounter resistance. So there are methodologies associated with process re-engineering. I've gone through this system before where you define the as-is processes and then map out the to-be processes based on best practices. This is a common methodology, the as-is to-be methodology, to understand where you are now, where you would like to be, and then decide how you're going to get there. And deciding to implement an ERP is a big driver for business process reengineering. So in the text, you'll see a discussion of OPM 3 in Chapter 9, and also business process reengineering and business process management. Here's a high-level overview of the framework, and it is project management that is the means by which this is carried out. So these are some of the highlights for the readings for Module 7. We will see you in the discussion threads. So let's have a